Dr. Valix adjusted the settings on his medical scanner and frowned at the results. The station's newest arrivals were exactly as the medical text described: fragile, with limited respiratory capacity, and surprisingly thin skin. Humans. The very thought made his upper tentacles curl with concern. Director Morin, I must once again express my professional reservations, Valix said, his translator converting his melodic native language into standard galactic common. Humans are simply not built for deep space. Their calcium-based skeletal structures alone make them unsuitable for extended periods in artificial gravity. Director Morin, a tall, silver-skinned being with 4 arms and eyes that shifted color with her mood, regarded the doctor with patience born from decades of diplomatic service. Your concerns are noted, Doctor, but Earth is now a member of the Stellar Confederation, and integration protocol requires their inclusion in all shared facilities. Her eyes flashed a brief yellow. Amusement. Besides, their medical officer comes highly recommended. Valix's skin flushed a deep purple, the equivalent of an eye roll in his species. Recommendations meant little when basic physiology was so fundamentally flawed. The docking bay doors slid open with a soft hiss. 4 humans entered the medical station's reception area, their movements careful and measured in the station's gravity, which was set slightly higher than Earth standard. Welcome to Medical Station Epsilon 9, Director Morin said warmly, extending her upper right arm in the human greeting style. I am Director Morin. We are honored to have Earth join our medical exchange program. The lead human, a male with short brown hair and a compact build, stepped forward. Despite his obvious discomfort in the station's atmosphere, he smiled, a gesture Valix found unsettling, given that most species showed teeth as a threat. Captain Thomas Wilson, Earth Medical Corps, the human said, his voice deeper than Valix expected. Thank you for having us. This is quite an impressive facility. The human introduced his companions. Security Officer Lisa Brown, Communications Specialist Mark Johnson, and finally, Medical Officer James Reed. Dr. Reed was taller than the others, with dark skin and alert eyes that immediately began studying the medical equipment visible through the bay windows. Valix noted how the human's breathing seemed labored, exactly as expected in the station's denser atmosphere. Dr. Valix will be your medical liaison, Director Morin said, gesturing toward him. He is our most experienced physician, with certifications in 17 species medical care. Valix moved forward, his 4 lower limbs carrying him in the smooth glide his kind was known for. Welcome, he said simply, making no move to initiate physical contact as humans often did. I trust your journey was uneventful. Mostly, Captain Wilson replied, though our pilot had some trouble adapting to your docking protocols. Not surprising, Valix said before he could stop himself. Your species does have notably slower reaction times than most spacefaring races. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Director Morin's eyes flashed a warning red, but Dr. Reed stepped forward before she could speak. Actually, Reed said, his voice calm but firm, humans have exceptional reaction times compared to many Confederation species. Our problem was with the station's outdated docking software, which seems incompatible with our newer systems. Valix's skin darkened with embarrassment. I speak only from medical data, of course. Perhaps your data needs updating, Reed suggested with another of those tooth-baring expressions. Director Morin quickly intervened. Why don't we show you to your quarters? You can settle in before tomorrow's orientation. As the humans collected their belongings, Reed stumbled suddenly, reaching out to steady himself against the wall. His face paled noticeably. Are you unwell, Doctor? Valix asked, medical training overriding his personal opinions. I'm fine, Reed insisted, straightening, just adapting to the gravity. Valix activated his scanner discreetly, reading the human's vital signs. Elevated heart rate, increased respiratory effort, mild hypoxia, all expected responses to the station environment. The scanner confirmed what Valix already knew. Humans were simply not built for space. You should rest, Valix advised, not unkindly. Your species requires significant recovery time after spatial transitions. Reed's jaw tightened, but he nodded. Thank you for your concern. As Director Morin led the humans away, Velix updated his medical log. Human crew members arrived today. Initial observations confirm standard physiological limitations. We'll monitor for adaptation issues, though expectations for meaningful contribution remain low. He closed the log and prepared the medical bay for the inevitable human health emergencies that would surely follow. It was going to be a challenging assignment. The medical bay's lights dimmed automatically as Dr. Valix reviewed patient files. 3 standard cycles had passed since the humans arrived, and already his predictions were proving accurate. The humans had visited the medical bay 7 times, primarily for respiratory adjustments and muscular pain relief. The door slid open, interrupting his thoughts. Dr. Reed entered, looking more adapted to the station's environment than Valix had expected. The human carried a datapad and wore the blue uniform of medical staff. Dr. Valix, Reed nodded politely. I hope I'm not interrupting. Not at all, Valix replied, his tentacles arranging themselves in a neutral position. I'm reviewing the treatment records for Officer Brown. Her respiratory distress is concerning. Reed glanced at the displays. You've prescribed triple the standard bronchodilator dosage. For humans, yes, your species requires more aggressive treatment. Valix gestured to his medical texts. The standard protocols are quite clear. Reed's expression tightened. Those protocols are outdated. Brown's symptoms are mild and would resolve with basic adaptation support. I prefer to be thorough, Valix replied coolly. You prefer to be excessive, Reed countered. And your recommendation for Captain Wilson's muscle pain? Surgical nerve blocking. That's a treatment of last resort, not a first response. Valix felt his skin darken with irritation. I'm simply being proactive. Your species' pain tolerance is notably lower than. An alarm blared, cutting off their argument. The emergency system activated, bathing the room in red light. Medical emergency in Docking Bay 3, announced the station's eye. Multiple casualties reported. Shuttle collision with station infrastructure. Both doctors moved instantly, professional disagreements forgotten. They rushed to the emergency transport tube, joining the response team already assembling. Report, Valix demanded as they entered the docking bay. The scene was chaos. A small transport shuttle had crashed into the docking mechanism, its hull breached. Station security was evacuating injured passengers, a mix of species from across the Confederation. 14 injured, reported a security officer. 3 critical. The shuttle's oxygen mix malfunctioned during docking, causing the pilot to lose consciousness. Valix quickly assessed the situation. Move the Raxians to Isolation Chamber 1. Their hemolymph is toxic to most species. The Krantarians need immediate pressure stabilization. Reed was already working, kneeling beside a small, insectoid being whose exoskeleton was cracked along its thorax. Without proper tools at hand, the human had improvised, using his own uniform shirt torn into strips to stabilize the fractured carapace. This one's going into shock, Reed called out. We need to stabilize before moving. Valix joined him, scanner ready. That's impossible. Takarian physiology requires specialized equipment in the medical bay. Reed shook his head. We don't have time. Look at the hemolymph pressure. Moving will kill them. He pointed to a nearby emergency kit. Get me the sealing foam and a pressure injector. That's not the protocol for. The protocol will get them killed. Reed snapped. The foam will harden around the exoskeleton, creating temporary stability. The pressure injector can deliver coagulant directly without full equipment. Valix hesitated, then retrieved the items. He watched as Reed applied the treatments with surprising skill, adapting techniques meant for other species. The Takarians' life signs began to stabilize. Where did you learn this approach? Valix asked, genuinely curious. Field medicine on Earth, Reed replied, not looking up. When you don't have the right tools, you improvise. Over the next hour, They worked side by side treating the injured. Velix noticed that Reed's breathing remained steady despite the physical exertion, unexpected for a human in the station's atmosphere. More surprising was his adaptability, treating species he presumably never encountered before. When the last patient was stabilized and transferred to recovery, Velix approached Reed in the now quiet medical bay. "Your treatment of the Tekarian was unorthodox," Velix admitted, "but effective. You saved its life." Reed shrugged. "Sometimes the textbook approach isn't the best approach." "Perhaps," Velix conceded. He studied the human with new interest. "Your medical training must be more comprehensive than I assumed. Or maybe humans aren't exactly what your textbooks claim," Reed suggested, a hint of challenge in his tired smile. Velix updated his medical log later that cycle. Human medical officer demonstrated unexpected competence during emergency response. Employed creative adaptations to standard protocols with positive outcomes. Isolated incident or indication of greater human potential than previously documented. Further observation required. For the first time, Velix felt a flicker of doubt about his understanding of humans. But surely one exceptional individual didn't invalidate years of established xenobiology. Reed was simply an outlier. Nothing more. The medical bay's isolation ward was nearly at capacity. In the past week, 17 patients from 8 different species had been admitted with the same puzzling symptoms: extreme weakness, compromised immune function, and progressive mental disorientation. Dr. Velix moved between beds, recording vital signs and adjusting treatment protocols. His normally immaculate tentacles showed signs of fatigue, their usual bright blue coloration dulled to a pale gray. He had slept little in the past 3 cycles. "Any change in the Vosarian ambassador?" Dr. Reed asked, entering the ward in full containment gear, standard protocol for unknown contagions. Velix shook his head. "Deteriorating, like the others. The antiviral treatments show no effect." Reed reviewed the latest test results on his datapad. "It's strange. Every affected species shows different disease progression rates, but identical symptom patterns, yet not a single human has shown symptoms. Your species may simply be the last to fall ill," Velix suggested, though he had begun to wonder himself. The station housed 27 humans, and all remained perfectly healthy despite working alongside infected colleagues. "Or we might have natural immunity," Reed countered, "which could be the key to developing a treatment." Velix started to respond but swayed suddenly, his lower limbs losing coordination. Reed moved quickly, helping to steady him. "You need to be examined," Reed said firmly. "I'm merely fatigued," Velix insisted, pulling away from the human's grasp. Reed activated his scanner without asking permission. "You're showing early symptoms: elevated core temperature, decreased neural activity in your secondary ganglia." "Impossible. I followed all containment procedures." "Apparently it wasn't enough," Reed replied. "You need to become a patient, not a doctor, right now." Velix wanted to protest, but his medical training recognized the truth. "I can still consult. My species progresses more slowly through infectious stages than most." "Fair enough," Reed agreed, "but from a bed, with monitoring." Within hours, Velix's condition worsened. The mysterious illness affected his species more severely than anticipated. Even so, he continued analyzing data from his medical bed, connected to the lab systems through his personal interface. Reed visited frequently, bringing new samples and test results. Despite the circumstances, they began working with surprising efficiency. "I've been comparing blood samples from infected species with human samples," Reed explained during one visit. "Look at this." He displayed microscopic images showing a tiny organism present in all infected patients, and also present, though differently structured, in human blood. "It's in humans too?" Velix asked, his academic interest temporarily overriding his discomfort. "Yes, but in us, it's dormant, encapsulated by specialized cells," Reed explained. "I think humans are carriers. We host the organism without being affected by it. Velex studied the images with growing excitement, but when it transfers to other species, it becomes active and pathogenic. Reed finished. Exactly. Earth has thousands of organisms like this, microbes that humans have adapted to carry harmlessly. Despite his illness, Velex's mind raced with the implications. If we can isolate how your immune system neutralizes it, we might develop a treatment. Reed nodded. They worked through the night, Reed running between the lab and isolation ward, Velex directing analysis despite his worsening condition. By morning, they had synthesized a potential treatment derived from human antibodies. The treatment needs testing, Reed said, preparing a hypo spray. I'll try it on the least affected patients first. No, Velex said weakly. His skin had faded to an alarming white, and 2 of his tentacles had gone completely numb, a serious symptom for his species. Try it on me. That's too risky. You're one of the most severely affected now. Precisely why it makes sense. If it works on me, it will work on anyone. Velex managed a weak approximation of a human smile. Besides, I trust your unorthodox methods now. Reed hesitated, then nodded. He administered the treatment and began monitoring. For 6 hours, there was no change. Velex's condition continued to deteriorate. Reed refused to leave the isolation ward, continuously adjusting the formula and administering a second dose. During the 7th hour, Velex's vital signs stabilized. By the 10th hour, his skin began returning to its normal blue. Within 1 full cycle, he was sitting up, still weak but clearly recovering. Remarkable, Velex said, reviewing the treatment data. Your species' immune response is unlike anything in our medical literature. Reed began treating the other patients, with similarly positive results. As the crisis abated, Velex updated his medical logs. Treatment developed from human immune components successfully countered unknown pathogen. Note: preliminary evidence suggests humans naturally carry numerous microorganisms potentially dangerous to other species, yet suffer no ill effects themselves. This unexpected immunity deserves further study. He paused, then added, humans may possess more biological resilience than previously understood, though this is likely simple evolutionary luck rather than inherent superiority. Even as he wrote these words, Velex wasn't entirely convinced of them anymore. The emergency alert sounded during the middle of the station's night cycle, its harsh tone cutting through the quiet. Dr. Velex, still recovering from the mysterious illness, jerked awake in his quarters. "Attention all medical personnel," announced the station's eye. "Priority distress signal received from Confederation research vessel Horizon. Multiple casualties reported. All available medical staff report to emergency briefing." Velex moved quickly despite his lingering weakness. He arrived at the command center to find Director Morin already coordinating with station staff. Dr. Reed and Captain Wilson stood nearby, studying holographic displays of the distressed vessel. The Horizon was conducting deep space research near the Kelmar Nebula, Director Morin explained as Velex joined them. They experienced a catastrophic containment failure in their engine core. They've managed emergency landing on a small moon, but report severe casualties and critical system failures. "What kind of research vessel?" Velex asked, immediately calculating potential hazards. "Radiation studies," Wilson replied grimly. "The nebula contains unusual isotope formations. They were collecting samples." Reed studied the sensor readings. "These radiation levels." His voice trailed off. Velex checked the numbers and felt his skin pale. "These are lethal exposure ranges for most known species. We've assembled a rescue team," Director Morin said. "The station's medical shuttle can reach them in 3 hours. We need a medical team to provide emergency care until a full evacuation fleet arrives." "I'll go," Velex volunteered. As the station's senior xenophysician, it was his duty. "So will I," Reed added. 2 other doctors, Dr. Krell, a multi-limbed Ventaxian, and Dr. Lore, a crystalline Tholian, also volunteered. A small security team would accompany them. Within an hour, the rescue shuttle launched from the station. The mood was tense as they approached the crash site. Valex reviewed radiation protection protocols with the team, emphasizing the extreme danger. Even with protection suits, exposure should be limited to 15 minutes maximum, he warned. The radiation will penetrate shielding at these levels. The shuttle landed 200 meters from the downed research vessel. Even from this distance, their sensors detected alarming radiation levels. The team donned protective suits and prepared their medical equipment. Remember, Valex said as they approached the airlock, quick assessment, stabilization of critical patients, then immediate evacuation. The scene inside the ship was worse than expected. Emergency lighting cast red shadows over the chaos. 23 crew members required medical attention, many with severe radiation poisoning. The ship's medical bay was destroyed, forcing the team to convert the mess hall into a treatment center. Dr. Krell checked the ship's environmental systems. Radiation levels are highest near the engine compartment, but they're dangerously elevated throughout the vessel. We need to move the critical patients to our shuttle immediately, Valex directed. The rest can follow once stabilized. As they worked, Valex noticed Reed constantly checking his radiation badge, which had already turned from green to yellow, indicating dangerous exposure. You should return to the shuttle soon, Valex told him. Your species is particularly vulnerable to radiation damage. Reed ignored the warning, continuing to treat a critically injured engineer. The situation worsened when Dr. Krull suddenly collapsed, his exposure limit reached. Dr. Lord followed soon after, her crystalline structure beginning to show clouding, a sign of severe radiation damage. We need to evacuate now, Valex insisted, feeling the radiation effects himself. His vision blurred, and his limbs trembled. There are still 5 critical patients trapped in the engine room, Security Officer Lisa Brown reported. The radiation there is off the charts. We can't reach them without fatal exposure, Valex said, the harsh reality clear. Captain Wilson exchanged looks with Reed and the other humans present. We'll get them. Impossible, Valex protested. The radiation levels there will cause immediate cellular damage. For most species, yes, Reed said, already removing his medical equipment from his pack to lighten his load. But humans have higher radiation tolerance than your medical texts suggest. Before Valex could stop them, Reed, Wilson, and Brown entered the highly radioactive section. Valex watched in disbelief as his scanner tracked their vital signs. The humans should have collapsed immediately, yet they continued functioning. 20 minutes later, well beyond safe exposure time, the humans returned, carrying 5 injured researchers. Their radiation badges had turned black, indicating lethal exposure levels. How are you still conscious? Valex asked as they loaded the rescued crew onto stretchers. Reed, pale and clearly suffering, managed a weak smile. Turns out those Earth disaster zones we grew up in gave us some advantages after all. Valex stared at the humans in growing amazement as they continued working despite radiation poison that should have incapacitated them instantly. His understanding of human physiology was being challenged in ways he never thought possible. The medical bay was quiet during the late shift. Dr. Valex moved silently between workstations, his 4 lower limbs barely making a sound on the polished floor. He glanced around to confirm he was alone before accessing the central database terminal. Computer, access restricted, xenobiology files. Authorization, Valex Medical Alpha. The screen illuminated with classified medical data. For the past week, Valex had been conducting private research whenever his duties allowed. The rescue mission had changed something fundamental in his understanding of humans, and he needed answers. The computer displayed comparative radiation resistance charts across known species. Valex had modified the parameters, testing different exposure models. The results remained consistent. Humans should not have survived the radiation levels on the horizon. Computer, run simulation Delta 7. Human exposure to Kelmar radiation type, 20-minute duration. The simulation showed catastrophic cellular damage, organ failure within hours, death within days. Yet Dr. Reed and the other humans from the rescue mission were already recovering after basic decontamination procedures. They had shown radiation sickness, certainly, but not the complete systemic collapse the models predicted. The door to the medical bay slid open. Velix quickly closed the classified files, but not fast enough. Interesting late-night reading, Doctor. Reed stood in the doorway, looking pale but steady on his feet. He should still be in recovery according to every medical text Velix had studied. Research, Velix said simply. You should be resting. Reed approached the terminal. Research on humans, specifically. Mind telling me why? Velix considered deflecting, then decided on honesty. Because you should be dead. All of you. The radiation levels in the engine room exceeded lethal thresholds for every known intelligent species. Yet here I stand. Reed settled into a chair across from Velix. You've been reviewing your data on humans since we arrived, haven't you? Yes. And Velix's skin shifted to a thoughtful purple hue. The data conflicts with observed reality. According to established xenomedicine, humans are Class 3 sentients, relatively fragile, with moderate adaptability, suitable primarily for controlled environments. Reed laughed, wincing slightly at the pain it caused his still healing tissues. And what does your observed reality tell you? That either my understanding is flawed, or the official data is. Velix paused. I suspect the latter. Reed nodded slowly. Show me what you found. Velix hesitated, then reopened the files. Together, they reviewed the data, official Confederation assessments of human physiology side by side with Velix's actual measurements from the station's humans. These respiratory capacity numbers are off by nearly 40%, Reed noted, pointing to one chart. And the cellular regeneration rate is severely underestimated. I've noticed, Velix agreed. And your species' resistance to radiation, pathogens, and environmental toxins far exceeds documented parameters. They spent hours comparing notes, with Reed providing insights into human physiology that weren't in any official record. Dawn cycle began, the station's lights gradually brightening to simulate morning. Computer, Velix said suddenly, display comparative planetary data, Earth versus Confederation average habitable worlds. A new set of charts appeared, showing gravitational forces, atmospheric composition, background radiation, pathogen density, and climate variability across known inhabited planets. Reed whistled softly. I never realized. Earth stood out dramatically in every category. Its gravity was 1.4 times the Confederation average. Its atmospheric pressure was 1.6 times denser. Its background radiation was nearly twice the standard. Its pathogen diversity was unmatched. Your homeworld is, by Confederation standards, a death trap, Velix said quietly. You evolved on one of the most challenging planets known to harbor intelligent life. That explains a few things, Reed mused. When humans first met alien species, we were surprised by how careful they were, how controlled their environments needed to be. Velix's skin rippled with realization. Your species didn't evolve to be fragile. You evolved to survive conditions that would kill most sentients. Which means, the Confederation's assessment of humans is fundamentally wrong, Velix concluded. You're not a Class 3 species adapted to controlled environments. You're apex survivors from an extreme world. Reed leaned back, considering this. Why would the official data be so wrong? Perhaps early observations were limited, Velix suggested. Or perhaps someone didn't want the full truth known. Reed finished. A notification appeared on the terminal, Director Morin requesting their presence for morning briefing. They had to pause their investigation. As they left the medical bay, Velix felt a strange mix of scientific excitement and professional embarrassment. He had been so certain of human weakness, so confident in his superior knowledge. Dr. Reed, he said before they reached the briefing room, I believe I owe you an apology. Reed smiled. For thinking we were weak. For not seeing what was directly before me, Valek replied. True scientific inquiry requires observation over preconception. I failed that basic principle. Well, Reed said, the truth is finally being revealed. That's what matters now. The station shuddered violently, throwing Dr. Valek against the wall of the research lab. Emergency lights flashed red as the artificial gravity fluctuated. The attack had come without warning. 3 unidentified vessels appearing suddenly from behind the nearby moon. All personnel to emergency stations, Director Morin's voice announced over the communication system. This is not a drill. Medical staff prepare for casualties. Valek steadied himself and rushed toward the medical bay. In the corridors, station crew of various species moved with controlled urgency. The station shook again as another impact struck. What's happening? Valek asked a security officer hurrying past. Kryvax raiders, the officer replied grimly. They're targeting our shield generators. The Kryvax, a notoriously aggressive species known for attacking medical and scientific outposts to steal advanced technology. The station, with its valuable medical research and equipment, would be a prime target. Valek reached the medical bay to find Dr. Reed already organizing emergency supplies. Several medical staff were securing critical patients. The outer hull breach alarm has triggered in sections 12 through 15, Reed reported. Life support is failing in the East Quadrant. Another violent impact rocked the station. This time, the lights flickered and died momentarily before emergency power engaged. A distant alarm wailed, the sound of atmospheric decompression. They've breached the hull, Valek said, checking the status displays. Environmental controls are failing. The medical bay's monitors showed cascading system failures throughout the station. Temperature dropping rapidly. Oxygen levels decreasing. Radiation shielding compromised. Dr. Krell stumbled into the medical bay, helping a Thulian researcher whose crystalline exoskeleton showed fracture damage. The research section is completely exposed to space, Krell reported, his respiratory sacs pulsing with effort in the thinning air. Most of the science team evacuated, but many are trapped. We need to seal off this section before life support fails completely, Valek said, moving to the environmental controls. Reed shook his head. If we seal off now, everyone trapped in the damaged sections will die. If we don't, everyone on the station might die, Valek countered. The harsh reality of crisis management weighed heavily on him. Another impact. This time, the station's artificial gravity failed completely. Equipment not secured to the walls began floating. In the sudden weightlessness, Valek saw several non-human crew members struggling to orient themselves, their species not adapted for zero-gravity conditions. The humans, however, moved with surprising efficiency, using handholds to propel themselves through the space. Captain Wilson appeared at the medical bay entrance, floating gracefully in the zero-gravity. Rescue teams are trying to reach the trapped crew, but conditions are deteriorating fast. Temperature in the affected sections is approaching -40 degrees. Oxygen levels critical. Reed exchanged glances with Wilson and the other humans present. Without discussion, they seemed to reach a collective decision. We'll get them, Reed said, already gathering emergency medical supplies. Impossible, Dr. Krell protested, his skin turning a pale gray from stress. The environmental conditions are survivable for humans, Wilson interrupted. At least long enough to reach the trapped crew. Valek watched as Reed, Wilson, and 4 other humans prepared for the rescue mission. They took only minimal protective gear, emergency oxygen masks and thermal gloves. The rest of the protection would slow us down, Reed explained, seeing Valek's concerned expression. And time is what they don't have. Before Valek could protest further, the humans departed, pushing off through the weightless corridor toward the damaged sections. Environmental alerts continued to flash on the monitors. The temperature in the breached sections had dropped to -50 degrees. Radiation levels were rising as the station's shielding continued to fail. The air was thinning throughout the station, as life support systems struggled. Dr. Krell collapsed first, his species particularly vulnerable to oxygen deprivation. Then Dr. Lore, unable to maintain her crystalline structure in the extreme cold. One by one, the non-human medical staff began to succumb to the harsh conditions. Velex felt his own consciousness wavering. His species could tolerate lower oxygen levels than many, but not indefinitely. His movements slowed as his body diverted energy to vital functions only. Through dimming vision, Velex watched the monitor tracking the human rescue team. They had reached the trapped crew and were making their way back through corridors exposed to near vacuum and extreme cold. By all medical knowledge, they should have been incapacitated. Yet they continued moving, carrying injured crew members who couldn't survive such conditions even briefly. As darkness crept into the edges of his vision, Velex had one clear thought. The humans weren't just surviving these lethal conditions, they were functioning in them, working in them, saving lives in them. His last conscious image was of Reed returning to the medical bay, frost covering his face, but still moving, still alert, still alive in conditions that had rendered nearly every other species unconscious or worse. The harsh truth couldn't be denied any longer. The medical conference hall was filled to capacity. Representatives from 37 species sat in tiered seating, their attention focused on the holographic display dominating the center of the room. Dr. Velex stood beside it, his normally pale blue skin flushed with a deeper hue, a sign of excitement in his species. "Thank you for attending this special session of the Confederation Medical Congress," he began. "Today I present my findings on human physiology, findings that challenge centuries of established xenomedicine." In the front row, Dr. Reed sat with the other humans from Medical Station Epsilon 9. 2 months had passed since the Kryvax attack. The station had been saved when Confederation defense vessels responded to their distress call, driving off the raiders before they could cause irreparable damage. For generations, Velex continued, the Confederation has classified humans as Class 3 sentients, moderately adaptable, but fundamentally fragile compared to advanced species. He gestured to the display, which showed the traditional classification system. This assessment is not merely incomplete, it is fundamentally wrong. A murmur passed through the audience. Several senior medical officials shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The evidence compiled in my report comes from direct observation during 3 critical incidents: a pathogen outbreak, a radiation emergency, and a catastrophic station attack. Velex activated the next display, showing detailed physiological data. In each case, humans demonstrated survival capabilities far beyond documented parameters. He proceeded methodically through his findings. Human respiratory systems that functioned in atmospheres that would suffocate most species, cellular structures that resisted radiation damage that would kill others instantly, natural immunity to pathogens that devastated other species, and perhaps most surprisingly, the ability to function consciously in environmental conditions that rendered other species comatose. But the most significant discovery, Velex said, accessing the final data set, is the explanation for these abilities. The display changed to show comparative planetary data. Earth appeared alongside other homeworlds of Confederation species. "This is Earth," Velex explained. "By every objective measure, gravity, atmospheric pressure, radiation exposure, pathogenic diversity, climate variability, it ranks among the most extreme inhabited worlds in known space." Director Morin, now serving on the Confederation Medical Board, leaned forward with interest. "Humans did not evolve to be fragile," Velex continued. "They evolved to survive conditions that would challenge or kill most sentient species. Their homeworld demanded exceptional resilience, and natural selection provided it." He displayed images from Earth, humans climbing mountains without breathing assistance, swimming in freezing oceans, running vast distances in scorching deserts, surviving in radiation zones, and recovering from injuries that would be fatal to many species. The traditional view of humans as weak was based on their social behavior, their tendency toward cooperation rather than dominance, their emphasis on community support rather than individual strength. We mistook kindness for weakness, compassion for frailty. Velex turned to face the humans directly. We failed to recognize that a species can be both physically resilient and socially cooperative. In fact, perhaps those traits evolved together on their challenging world. The presentation concluded with Velex's formal recommendation: reclassification of humans as Class 1 adaptive sentients, with recognition of their unique physiological capabilities. The conference hall erupted in discussion as medical officials debated the implications. For some, it was a scientific revelation. For others, particularly those with military backgrounds, it raised uncomfortable questions about human potential in the Confederation hierarchy. After the session ended, Velex found Reed waiting in the quiet garden outside the hall. "Quite a presentation," Reed said, watching as golden leaves from the alien plants drifted down around them. "You've caused quite a stir in the Confederation." "Truth often does," Velex replied, "though I suspect some officials knew more about human capabilities than they admitted." Reed nodded. "Probably. It's easier to keep a species in check if you convince them they're fragile. The Confederation will need to reevaluate many of its approach to Earth," Velex said. "Your people will likely be offered different roles now. Exploration of harsh environments, emergency response in extreme conditions. As long as we're seen as partners, not just useful tools," Reed replied. Velex extended all 4 of his tentacles, a gesture of profound respect in his culture. "The greatest lesson I've learned, Dr. Reed, isn't about human physical resilience. It's that I mistook your species' greatest strength, your capacity for compassion, even in the harshest conditions, as a weakness." Reed smiled, extending his hand to meet Velex's tentacles in the human greeting style they had once found so strange. Perhaps that's the real revelation worth sharing with the Confederation. As they stood together in the garden, representatives from 2 vastly different evolutionary paths, Velex reflected on how completely his view had changed. The humans weren't merely surviving in the universe. They were thriving in conditions that should have broken them. Their resilience wasn't just physical, it extended to their spirit, their willingness to risk everything to save others. In the end, the most profound discovery wasn't just that humans were stronger than anyone had thought. It was that strength and kindness could exist together, perhaps even because of each other.